Our old pal Kyle Dubas making moves in Pittsburgh, acquiring Norris defenseman Erik Karlsson. When will Brad Treliving make his bold move for the Buds? We'll discuss all that and more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centered podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's going on, pal? You finally got some big news to talk about today.
Oh yeah, work was so much fun dealing with that trade. I haven't dealt with a trade that big in a really long time.
You want to break it down for the people who, aren't familiar with how that stuff goes down? Like for those who are always interested, well, what happens in the sports industry or some behind the scenes when a trade like that happens for guys like you who are working in the newsroom, or I guess somewhat the newsroom, like it's
This
all
is
now
my
remote.
newsroom right here.
Yeah, it's all remote now, but like what does go down? How does that process roll out when you see that there's a trade that's brewing? Like what's the process there for guys like you?
You got to get yourself all your bases covered, right? You try to see what information's out there. In this case, Elliot Friedman had reported that the trade was being close to being done, and which pretty much in Elliot Friedman terms means within a few minutes it's pretty much going to be done. So you try to whip up in my case, I'm whipping up an article ready to go because we got to get that alert out to all the people who subscribe to alerts on their phones, because you all get alerts when stuff happens. And they're all telling me when it happens. Like, yes, I'm the one that sent the alert out. So, yeah, we're getting that out. And then it's getting more information, right? Because Friedman said, and a lot of guys said, yep, deal's being completed. Third teams involved, likely going to be Montreal. It's like, okay, going to need a little more here to work with, right? Especially with a 3-team trade.
Yeah.
Because the order of the sequence is important here, right? Technically, the Montreal-Pittsburgh trade happened first because you had to make those moves first before the Karlsson to Pittsburgh trade was made. So,
really?
Yeah, because they had to make they had to send the final piece of the whole puzzle was who was San Jose getting in return for Karlsson. That's kind of how those trades really do happen. Like when it was officially announced, and that's the one I'm waiting for. It's like that official announcement so I can put all the information together. You saw like the kind of the final bones of that deal. And God bless the Pittsburgh Penguins for laying it out so easily, because they're like, Pittsburgh gets this, Montreal gets this, and then San Jose gets this.
Yeah, the press release there was very nicely laid out, and
Yeah.
so it was easy to see. Okay, this is what happened. But you know what? Like what I enjoyed about it is it was almost very like it was basketball-esque with the 3-team
Oh
trades.
yeah.
There's a bunch of picks and there's a bunch of players and prospects and guys moving everywhere from team to team. It was like a real traditional 3-way trade, not just okay, this team's going to park 40% of the contract and they're going to get a draft pick for being, a broker. Like we saw some of that. It was a legitimate 3-team trade. It was a lot of fun. And ultimately, it ends up with Erik Karlsson landing in Pittsburgh. Kyle Dubas, it was rumored for a while that he was interested, and Pittsburgh was heavily interested in trading for Karlsson, who did come out earlier this year and say that he wanted out, didn't expect to start the season with the Sharks. And ultimately, that comes to fruition here this weekend and Sunday afternoon. Erik Karlsson to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like we said, it's a 3-way deal, so there's kind of a lot. Oh, do you have a graphic that we can kind of show? It's a lot easier, I guess, to follow along with that graphic there that they did put out, the Pittsburgh Penguins. But ultimately, Karlsson, they did retain only 1.5 million though, so the Sharks didn't retain as much as initially thought. Did that surprise you that all the Penguins were able to get the Sharks to retain was 1.5 million, which means Karlsson's AAV is still $10 million, and that makes him the highest paid Pittsburgh Penguin?
Yeah, that was the surprise, or the big surprise for me, because we were all kind of waiting for, you know, what was San Jose going to have to compromise in some way here, right? We have people say, oh, maybe no, they might not go 50%. Maybe they have to go 40% retain. Maybe they have to do, a good chunk of it. But when I heard the third team was being involved, I'm like, okay, there's going to be some players moved around. And I think what was more surprising is Jeff Petrie, when he went to Montreal. I thought, okay, Montreal was just going to absorb the cap hit. It's like, no, Pittsburgh's taking 25%. So essentially, the money that San Jose was retaining for Karlsson, Pittsburgh used that as like, okay, we're going to retain Petrie for the 2 year. So those two kind of equaled each other out. So I know it says 10 million for Karlsson, but it's not really 10 million when you add on the Petrie retained.
Well, different trades, but yeah,
Yeah,
I get what you're saying. But all in all, like we'll lay it out for those who are
yeah.
listening
So it's right here.
via audio. If you're watching us here on YouTube, you can see what the trade is. So the Pittsburgh Penguins receive Erik Karlsson at a $10 million cap hit. Rem Pitlick they received, who's a prospect for the Montreal Canadiens, decent player. Like he had a hat trick against the Leafs, if I'm not mistaken, this season, or he had a hat trick against someone. Was it? I can't remember if it was the Leafs or not, but he did have a hat trick this year. I remember. Pretty much the only good thing, but he could score a little bit. Depth player at the very least for the Penguins. Dylan Hamelic, I'll be honest, never heard of that player in my life, but it's a prospect also go to Pittsburgh along with a 2026 third round pick from the San Jose Sharks. So that's what's going to Pittsburgh. So they got Karlsson, a draft pick, a third round pick in 2026, a depth player in Rem Pitlick, and then a depth prospect in Dylan Hamelic. The San Jose Sharks retained money on Erik Karlsson. They retained $1.5 million, and they also were able to get a 2024 first round pick, which is top 10 protected. So there's some protection on that pick for Pittsburgh if they do end up sucking this year, which I don't expect them to. I think that this trade definitely puts them into the playoff category. So top 10, I think, is probably not something they're hoping to do this season, especially with Crosby at the helm. But regardless, it is top 10 protected just in case. They also took on the contract of Mikael Granlund, Jan Ruta, and then they took on Mike Hoffman in the deal, who comes over from the Montreal Canadiens. So a first round pick, Mikael Granlund, Jan Ruta, and Mike Hoffman going to San Jose. And Montreal got a 2025 second round pick. They got Jeff Petrie at 25% retained, and they got Casey DeSmith and then Nathan Laguerre. I'm not quite familiar with that player either. So some sort of depth player or depth prospect. But all in all, that was the trade. Lots of moving parts in this deal for certainty. And I don't know, like who did the best, who did the worst? Like if you had to grade each team, I suppose, on how the trade worked out for them. What grade would you give each club, Dave?
I like, obviously with the Penguins, they got the player that they wanted. They got a draft pick still back. I know they gave up a first and a second round pick, but they got a third back. Obviously with the $10 million salary for the next few years, like you still have to live with that contract for a little bit, especially because Karlsson, yeah, he put up a great offensive season, but defensively, his game is almost non-existent in some ways. So I would give it a B minus for the Penguins on the Penguins end, because they end up getting Karlsson without really having to take on as much money they found a way to make that work without giving up a lot of assets, which is why next for San Jose, first round pick, you had to get that. Like there was no way this deal was going to get done without a first round pick. But then you get three players who are kind of older here, right? Like they didn't get a prospect, they didn't get a young roster player. They got older guys that now they're going to have to flip and hopefully turn those into assets. So like, in a way, I don't want to give this a high grade. I want to give it like a C minus, unless I see what they can do with these other three pieces that they got here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that they did well on this at all. I think they were probably just happy that they didn't have to retain a lot of money on that contract, and ultimately that's what it felt like. I mean, everyone said, hey, if they're going to retain money on a deal, they're probably not going to get a high return. Like that's just the problem, and you never know what you're going to get at Erik Karlsson. Like you said, this year was almost an anomaly of what we've seen out of him in the last 4 years, basically. Is this what he is, or was this just a kind of a 1 year caught lightning in a bottle and away he went? I don't know. The Penguins hope that's not the case, and that he can still be a 100-point defenseman for a couple of seasons. But doing so, you're right. I think in hindsight, this trade could turn out to look a little bit better for the San Jose Sharks, depending on what they get in return when they flip these assets. You look at all of these players, though, like Granlund, yeah, he's got 2 more years left on his deal at $5 million. You probably are going to have to play him out. But you got Mike Hoffman, who's got only 1 year left on his deal at 4.5. So he's someone who could be used as a rental at some point. And then Jan Ruta's got a pretty respectable cap hit at 2.75. And, he's somebody who's a pretty solid defenseman. I think we learned pretty quickly when Victor Hedman struggled without him that he was a fairly important part of that Tampa Bay blue line in the top four. And he was a little underrated at that point. So I would imagine that, a team would probably be willing to give up an asset or two for Jan Ruta. We're going to go over some, potential trade options for the Maple Leafs in the next segment. His name might come up, to be honest with you. It could potentially come up. But to your point, yeah, I don't like this trade from San Jose, like at all. I guess they're happy that they got to move on from Karlsson, and they still did get a first-round pick out of the deal, but they also added $2.55 million in space. When all said and done, they're paying more money for these acquisitions of Granlund, Ruta, and Hoffman than they were paying for Erik Karlsson. And that's where it's a bit of a head-scratcher for me, where it's like, why did you turn, one asset who's making whatever, $11.5 million, but you turn that guy who was actually productive for you at 100 points into three guys who are very much, meh. Like Mikael Granlund turned into an absolute. It was a circus what was going on with him in Pittsburgh. He had like one goal after the trade deadline. Like he did absolutely nothing, and he's making 5 sheets this year and next. Mike Hoffman, he's got injury issues, so who knows if he's going to be able to stay healthy for them to even flip at the deadline. And Jan Ruta, like I said, is a decent piece, but still, they went and got 3 guys who make more money than Karlsson does alone. And no, those 3 don't make up Erik Karlsson. So it is a little bit head scratching. You'd think they would have done something a little better with the cap space than just getting 1 first-round pick out of the deal. And they had to give up a third. They had to give up, a couple other things as well to get it done. So it was a little confusing from San Jose. I think they probably would have wished they got something a bit better. But at the end of the day, I guess that's was the best case scenario. That was the best offer on the table, and you kind of got to take it. Montreal, I think they did all right. They were kind of the tertiary team in this, but I would probably give them a B. Like they're able to bring Jeff Petrie back into the fold, who was a good locker room guy, and he was a good player for them, obviously. So he gets back into the building, and they need defensemen anyways, some veteran guys to help with their young group. So I think they like that addition. Casey DeSmith can come in and be the backup to Sam Montembeault and potentially push for some sort of tandem. And they got a second-round pick out of the deal as well. So, they were able to offload Mike Hoffman's salary while doing so. So, they were able to do all right, so I'll give them a B. And Pittsburgh, I'm a little higher on them. I don't think I gave them a grade after you did. I think I probably would give Pittsburgh a B+, to be honest with you, because Karlsson's a good player. I think he is, and I think Rem Pitlick, don't sleep on him. He's someone who could probably put up, anywhere from 10 to 15 goals, a depth player for the Penguins. And what the Penguins – what that team does is they can turn depth players into role players pretty quickly once they get a chance to sit shotgun next to Gino or Sid. And if he ends up with some injuries and Pitlick goes up the lineup a little bit, hey man, like this guy could easily be a 14, 15 goal guy. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, we got Karlsson and a 15 goal player in this deal. It's not too shabby for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So I think Dubas, I give him a B plus. Montreal, I give a B. San Jose, I'm with you, man. I think that's like a C minus return for the Sharks.
Yeah, for Montreal, like I didn't mind what they did in terms of getting Petrie, because eventually too they could also flip him at some point if they feel like that's necessary,
Yeah.
as well. And he has a better cap hit now when you look at Pittsburgh retaining that salary. And yeah, like when you look at the trade in and of itself, like yeah, I think the big takeaway here is that like I thought San Jose was going to get more, and it makes me wonder what other teams weren't willing to do a deal like that, right?
Yeah.
Why did Pittsburgh ultimately being the one able to do it? Like if you're Carolina, if you're Seattle, like,
Honestly, so it's weird. I think honestly, they ultimately wanted to try and not retain as much as possible. And maybe Pittsburgh was willing to take on more of the contract than any of the other teams. But then you turn around and you go and you get Granlund and Hoffman and those deals.
yeah,
It kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. But like I said, Hoffman's deal expires this year. Granlund's deal expires next year. And I haven't looked at the contract structure breakdown, but it's possible too that they're not even owed, a large portion of their contracts right now. Like I'll quickly take a look and see maybe their deals have been paid out a little bit and they're actually not making a whole lot of money. Signing bonus, no, actually it looks like Granlund will be making 11 million this year, so he's actually making a decent amount of money. So that doesn't make sense there. What about Mike Hoffman? Did he have anything, or is he all salary? He's all salary, and he's making $5 million this year too. So actually, it looks like they're paying an extra 1.5 million in real money than they are in the cap. Like it just, yeah, it's
it's not
not.
looking much better as the more we dig into this for San Jose. I'm sorry, Locked On Sharks. This is not looking
Yeah,
very great. I guess this is just also something they just want to wipe the slate clean and just move on too.
yeah, like it's essentially what it is. But yeah, like Carlson's got what 3-4 years left on that deal, so they are getting out of the long term money. They'll save obviously money in the next 4 years, but for this year and next, they're spending more money to trade Carlson than they are. But hey, it's a team who's reloaned. They're able to get a first round pick, and hopefully, they can add a talented player with that pick next year in the draft. So Kyle Dubas busy at work. He's getting things done for Pittsburgh. I think this makes them a playoff team, especially after making that addition. If that group can stay healthy, they were oh so close last year. Now you add a 100-point defenseman and Erik Karlsson, who could be a game breaker on any given night. Yeah, I think that probably makes them at least 1 point better and put them surely in that playoff hunt. So Dubas making moves. Is Brad Treliving going to make a move before the start of the season? Why don't we come back and talk about, if it's time for Treliving to make his big trade and put his stamp on this team and some options that could be out there for the Maple Leafs. So we'll do that on the other side. But first, Dave, a word from our show sponsor.
Yep, today's show is brought to you by a product I use literally every day, AG1 by Athletic Greens. Maybe you're like me, you want to be healthy and eat well, but it's always easier said than done. That's no longer the case with AG1. With one delicious scoop and a glass of water each day, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, immune system, energy recovery, focus, aging, all of those things. It can be hard and expensive to keep track of multiple different supplements and vitamins, not to mention how hard it can be on your stomach. AG1 costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. So if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. I got Dave Morassutti with me. We are year round. It's usually a daily podcast, but during the off season, we knock it down to 3 days a week. There's not a whole lot going on, but today there actually was quite a bit to talk about with the trade going down. But if you've enjoyed our conversation and you want to keep up to date with the latest of what's going on with not just the Maple Leafs but around the NHL, do subscribe to us, the Locked On Leafs podcast, wherever you get your audio podcast from, and also up on YouTube as well. Leave a like and share it with your friends. Let everyone know, that you can listen to Leafs talk every single day here on Locked On Leafs. You can join us on the Discord as well. I know a couple of people asked about the Discord once again, so we'll make sure we put it in the show notes down below so you can join our Discord and get in with the Locked On Leafs family. And we're going to try and get one of the lucky listeners on Friday for our Fan Friday. So we'll try and ask someone out in the Discord if you want to get involved with that. But today, the Pittsburgh Penguins, they made the trade. Kyle Dubas put his big stamp on things by bringing in Erik Karlsson. Are the Maple Leafs going to make a deal? Is Brad Treliving going to make his big time trade this offseason? Because there's still a lot of speculation that this isn't the blue line that he intends on going into the season with, and something should be done or will be done. The size of that blue line isn't quite Treliving-esque if you look at, how the Flames have operated over the course of his tenure there. So will he make a trade? Who's out there to, bring in for Brad Treliving if a trade does present itself? These are the type of things that we're going to get into, right now. But first and foremost, I mean, who's out there, Dave, that you think could potentially be options for Brad Treliving to leave Steven target?
I mean, it's really bare wasteland in terms of like obvious names, right? There's not really like that name I says he should be next on the list, because Karlsson was really the only defenseman we heard being out there, right? So, I've had people say, "Oh, why don't the Leafs try to go and get a guy like Brett Pesce from Carolina?"
Yeah, that's a name we've heard a lot.
That's a name we've heard a lot. I don't know what his future is going to be like in over in Carolina there, especially after they signed Orlov, and it seems like long term the future's not really certain there. So yeah, he's an option.
Did they end up signing D'Angelo, by the way? I was away, and I
Oh,
remember
right.
that. Did they end up actually going through
Yeah.
with it? Like, did he sign there?
Yeah, he did end up signing 1 year $1.675 million deal. So that in a way made people really think that they were out on Karlsson when they did that deal as well, because
Mhm.
they just another right shot defenseman there. So I think the good thing about Pesce is he's a right shot, can play, in the situations that you need him to play. Solid defenseman. I know some people have their own they're kind of up and down on him, but I think he's a guy that, if he's available, the Leafs should definitely be kicking tires on. Now, the Locked On Avalanche crew, just a little while back, had brought up the name Devon Taves as an option
Interesting.
for the Leafs, because he's going to be someone that they can't afford down the road,
Right.
right? They got some commitments up front. They're going to have eventually Gabriel Landeskog should be playing hockey again. I know
You
he's out for
hope.
the year.
I mean, you hope. I
Yeah.
like that's that. You do hope, but I mean,
Hmm.
yeah. Like the thing with Devon Tays is he's gonna have to. They're gonna have to try and get a contract done with him, right?
Yeah.
Like the Leafs. Can the Leafs afford Devon Tays? Like
Mhm.
that's where you do kind of. I don't know if they could afford a guy like that.
Well,
Like I think Pesci would be cheaper than Tays.
I think Pesci would definitely be cheaper than Taves. The thing about Taves is, okay, who are you gonna have to give up to get a guy like Taves? The Locked On Avalanche crew brought up Nylander, right? So do you make that swap, and whatever contract you could have potentially gave Nylander, does some of that money go to Taves? That's how I could see it working long term. But again, I don't know what exactly Devon Taves' next deal could look like. He's 29. He's making
Yeah,
4.1 right now. He's a pending UFA. Like, the Avalanche have a serious decision to make here, because in a couple of years, Mikko Rantanen is going to need a new deal. They got Nichushkin starting his new deal. They got a lot of guys who are on deals right now. Fortunately, Cale Makar signed for the next 4 years, so they're okay with that. But yeah, like I think there's going to be one of these defense, whether it's Devontae's, Samuel Girard, one of those two, I feel like is not going to be around long term because eventually, if Bowen Byram continues to progress like he has, he has 2 more years left on his current deal, then he's going to be up for a new deal. Like these are questions they're going to have to answer at some point.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting name out there. I mean, the Calgary Flames were an easy, connect the dots type of team as
Right.
well, right? Coming from there, he knows that team very well. Noah Hannafin is a guy who's been linked to Toronto a couple of times. Nikita Zadorov, I know in the comment section on Twitter, a lot of people have been, asking like, "Hey, the Leafs should trade for Zadorov, right? Big physical defenseman." Chris Tanev is a name that's been tossed around a little bit as well, and he's been a very long time guy who's been associated with at least trade rumors back to his time with Vancouver. A lot of people wanted to bring home the Toronto product back into Toronto. So that's another team that they could go shopping for. Obviously, Craig Conroy and Brad Treliving have a great relationship with each other. So maybe they could try and get something done. Like there's Hannafin. I believe I did hear though that he prefers to play in the States. So I don't know if you're going to be able to get a contract done with him because he's again on a 1 year deal, just like Nylander, just like Pesci, just like Matthews, and then they could hit the road. So unless you can get a deal done with him, he might not be available. Zadorov is interesting, I guess. As one of those guys who they could maybe come up with something. I don't think he would cost too much to bring in. I think another interesting name though, Andrew Peeke of the Columbus Blue Jackets, I think would be an interesting name. Just 25 years old. He's got a couple more years left on his deal, making 2.75, right shot defenseman, big body, penalty killer, block shots, hits guys. And Columbus, they brought in a lot of defensemen this summer. Like they traded for Provorov. They went out and they signed they signed another big defenseman. I'm trying to remember who it was.
Well,
Oh,
Severson.
Severson, that's it. They signed
Yeah.
Damon Severson. Yeah, or they trade and then
It was a
signed him.
sign and trade. I
Yeah,
think.
that's what it was. Yeah, and then they're getting Werenski back healthy. They've got David Juracek, who they took second overall last year. That they'll be looking to probably try and get into the lineup. So there's a lot of defensemen out there. Andrew Peeke might not. If they could get something for him, potentially they would look to move on and maybe get a forward or something to try and address some of the lack of scoring on that team. So he would be another interesting guy who's youngish defenseman
Mhm.
signed on a pretty good contract at sub 3 million.
Well, it's interesting you bring this up because I remember listening to the Chris Johnson show back in like end of June. I would want to say it was like when all these
I,
deals were made.
I'll say Andrew Peeke was a name that I did bring up during the trade deadline as a guy who
Mhm.
the Leafs might target as well, if that's where you're going
Yeah.
with that.
So CJ said at the end of like June, he said like a guy like Andrew Peeke, you know, would generate the most interest of any defenseman on the Blue Jackets because there's that's the trade market was going to be the best way for teams to go out and improve their blue line, and he was a guy that has generated a lot of interest around the league. He also brought up obviously Adam Boqvist and Jake Bean
Yeah,
are guys they're
those
willing to
are
listen to, but they're
those
young
are
defensemen. I
yeah,
don't
those aren't
see
tree
how.
living guys, right? Those aren't
No,
tree living guys.
no,
Peak would
but I do think Peak, if that's something that Columbus still wants to explore, I think the Leafs like you don't have to always get the flashy guys. You need to get those guys that are just going to play solid for you, and I think that's something True Living is looking for. We're not looking. He's not really looking to add more flash. He's looking to add some ruggedness and just some size to that blue line too.
Yeah, 6'3", 210 pounds, right shot defenseman. He hits, he blocks shots. It's exactly what you're looking for. That's what they need in their top forward. He's only 25 years old, and like I said, signed to a contract at a pretty healthy 2.75 million bucks, and he's a pretty decent skater if I do recall. as well, watching him, play for the last couple of seasons with the Columbus Blue Jackets. So, we'll see if they can make something happen. But one of those guys, maybe they can try and bring Jan Ruta into the fold. Try and bring someone like
Mhm.
that in. He worked very well when he was with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Maybe San Jose is looking to do a quick flip on Ruta, and he's someone who's making under $3 million himself, and perhaps they can try and bring him in to address a need for some size in the top four. I believe Ruta has some size to him actually. Let me just quickly check that. But if I do recall, he definitely isn't a runt. If
He is
I'm not
6'3", 204 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So 6'3", 205. So yeah, we'll see what Brad Treliving has in store for us. See if we can try and get a Leafs trade to break at some point over the next few weeks here. So we're only just 6 weeks or so from training camp. It's coming quick, bud. It's coming quick, and it still seems like there's one move to be made on the blue line. Like it just John Klingberg doesn't seem like the only change to the blue line.
Yeah.
It seems like there should be something else that Treliving would or should want to do there. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, buddy. I think we were going to do the puck doku, but I think we ended up going a little bit long on the conversation. So maybe we'll save the puck doku for the next show on Wednesday. We'll do Wednesday's one because I think we're gonna maybe try and do one each day. We'll see what ends up happening. But if we end up over talking things, whether it's a heavy news day, kind of like today was, sometimes we're gonna have to push it. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasting platforms, also up on YouTube. You receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead and leave a like and a comment down below on YouTube. Who should the Maple Leafs go after? Who can they add to the blue line to make it a better group? Let us know in the comment section down below. We'll be back another episode for you guys on Wednesday. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.